Hi everyone, welcome to our final lesson in this series. It's a continuation of the Alla Prima still life painting that we've been working on with perishable objects. So these two objects are lemon and a plum, and obviously if left over a long period of time they'd start to decay and look different. So we're trying to get our painting done quite quickly, and in this instance in a single setting. You can do it over kind of a few days. But we've just gone for a small painting that can be completed in a single setting. So if you've watched the previous two lessons, you'll remember that we began spending about sort of 20 or 25 minutes just blocking in, sketching with burnt umber the different shapes, so the general shapes of the two pieces of fruit, and then the shadows as well, and doing a little bit of the background. And then last week we blocked in these colours, so trying to establish the general colours of the lemon and the plum. So this is our last sort of session with this piece, and it's going to be the last sort of 20 or 25 minutes. So in total it'll have taken about a bit over an hour, maybe an hour to hour and 20 minutes to get to this stage, or the stage will eventually end up. So far I've been working on it for a bit over 40 minutes. Obviously you might take a little bit longer, but you can see it's certainly manageable within sort of a day's work to get something quite nice down. But once you've got to this point, it's not too hard. So if it feels reasonably well established to me at this point, so I'm not too unhappy with it as a little sketch or a colour study. They can also be something, once you've got a colour study like this from life, you can then work it up into a bigger, more complex piece. Or just use it as experience, learning about different textures. The first thing we're going to do is work a bit on the background. So I just want to deepen the darks in the background, just to pull everything forward. So at the moment the background feels a little bit flat compared to the two pieces of fruit. That was because we didn't really bother too much to work on them last week, just because we were focusing on the fruit and blocking in those colours. And there are going to be subtle colour shifts in this background, so it's only going to be kind of pushing some darks darker, adding a few little bits of highlights and so on. But there's a couple of things I want to focus on. I want to darken the background, and I want to add a little bit of a highlight on the lip, because it's sort of a wooden, polished wooden table. It's got a little bit of a highlight running along the front edge. A little bit of a detail where there's sort of an overlap to the tabletop. And also there's a bit of a reflection in this lemon, so of the lemon in the table. So we're going to do that, get our background kind of nicely sorted, then return for the last sort of 10-15 minutes. We're going to return to the fruit and kind of get them a little bit more polished than they are at the moment. So yeah, I'll begin using the same colours that I had last week. Just going to use a little mixture of alizarin crimson and black, and I'm just going to go in and deepen this background, and then just kind of softly blur it up into the browns above. So you can see just adding in that dark just starts to kind of punch out shapes of the fruit a little bit more, which is nice. I can just sort of softly glaze it up. I said previously that I was going to leave this kind of loosely painted top section. So it's just going to softly go up into there. And I'm going to leave that kind of loosely painted area. But mainly I wanted to just deepen the darks in the background, immediately behind the fruit. And then I'm going to work on creating a kind of soft transition out from the back of the table. So it's going to feel kind of dark back there, and it's going to get progressively lighter as the tabletop moves forwards. So it's going to be kind of like a gradient that moves towards what appears to be the front of the image. And what that'll do is create a kind of sense of a flatter plane. Making its way forward. That's going to give a little bit more depth and three-dimensionality to the tabletop, which will be useful. So you can see doing that kind of starts to make the whole thing feel a little bit more sort of finely rendered and sophisticated, but it doesn't take too much effort, something like this. Just going on with a different brush to blend, because I want that to feel kind of nice and soft. Creating a softer edge behind also pulls the lemon and the plum forward. That's because it kind of creates the sense that there's sort of a blurriness going on. If you think of how a camera works, you always get that sort of slight out of depth look. When you focus on one object in a scene. I also want it to just get sort of progressively lighter as it comes forward, this tabletop, and again that creates a sense of it moving towards us and just reinforces the spatial kind of aspect to the image. Also just slightly softening the further edges of these shadows, because shadows always get softer the further away from the object that's casting the shadow is. So we've got a kind of semi-dusty tabletop, which is nice. We can now work a little bit on the front edge of the tabletop. So we're going to just work over, kind of greying it out slightly, so we don't want it to be quite as brown as it is. Not entirely. Can use the same color just down below, but as I said, we're going to create a little bit of a sense of there being a lip, which we're going to do just by continuing this color here down below. Going to keep that bit light, and then we're going to put a shadow basically. So if you imagine if the table lip is sticking out, it's going to have a little cast shadow below it onto the portion of the table that it's casting a shadow onto, and it just creates a nice, it's something that's from the original setup that I have, my tabletop that I'm working from. And then just using the side of the brush, I'm going to smudge down. Just to give a sense of that lip protruding out. So you see that works pretty well. Pretty quickly, it didn't take too long. Just trying to make sure it's moderately straight. Yeah, that's not too bad. And finally, we're going to look for a little bit of a highlight, so pick up a little bit of white paint. It's going to be a fairly grey-ish highlight. Put a little bit of a brighter point in the center of it as well. I'm also looking for a little bit of a kind of gradient across the top of the table, just from left to right. So it kind of feels like a little bit of a dusty tabletop, which is nice. And that pretty much sorts out our tabletop. So we can give brushes a little bit of a clean and then spend the last 5 or 10 minutes just going back and addressing some little bits and pieces of detail on the fruit. I'll start with this plum. Now just looking at it, having kind of stared at it for a little while, I just want to make the left hand side of it a little bit brighter just to reinforce that sense. So you can see I'm using the same size brushes, but I'm just being a little bit more careful with my blendings. I'm just trying to address that form a little bit. So I'm just adding a little bit more of a highlight. And it's starting to feel a bit more plum-like, which is good. So it felt a tiny bit too harsh perhaps before. That shift from the lighter colours to the darker colours. And can do the same up here, so I just want to great, just a little bit more of a subtle transition, which is nice. Now the other thing that's a little bit of a detail that we can look for is there's a little stem just protruding out. Yeah, it's quite nice. So just a little stem that protrudes out. From the top of the plum. And it's a nice little detail to kind of spot and add in. And these little details, they can be a quick way just to make the painting look a little bit more sophisticated. Nothing too difficult to do. And there's also a nice little shadow cast on the plum from that stem, which is another nice little detail to get in. Looks quite good. Just starts to kind of put it in a specific, something more of a specific space. So I'm just focusing on a few little bits and pieces of detail that can be worked up with relative ease. Obviously your own painting will have different aspects that you can develop. can also look for, I'm just looking for some sort of shifts between high and low chroma purples. So at the moment it's mostly quite high chroma what I've got, so I just want to add a few little variations to that, because you tend to get this thing sometimes, it's called bloom, I think, on fruit like plums, that just, it's kind of like a dull, I don't quite know what it is, like a dull fuzziness that you get. So you could look for that and just kind of add a little bit more texture to the surface of the plum, otherwise it feels quite regular. But you don't want to overdo it, so I've possibly slightly overdone it here. So just tone it back a bit. Yeah, it's not too bad. And I can also look for there's a reflection of the lemon and this edge of the plum, which is another nice little detail to go in for. Tricky one though, a little bit trickier than some of the other things we've been working on, but it's not too bad actually. So if I go for a slightly stronger, as it wraps around, the reflection gets a bit more intense. Down that side. Yeah, that doesn't work too badly. Maybe just ever so much more like that. That's not too bad. And then the other thing that I can address while I'm thinking about that is, I think I mentioned there's a bit of a reflection, because the yellow is so strong in this this lemon, sort of reflects into the table a bit, and that's another nice little detail. To capture. And pretty easy to do as well. I'm going to do it, it's not actually as obvious with the plum, but I am going to do it with the plum as well, because it feels a little bit odd that the plum isn't reflecting at all. I think it's actually, in my setup, it's just because the table's a little bit dustier where the plum is. Yeah, I'll just put a little bit, a sense of pinkiness in front of the plum. Yeah, that's not too bad. So we're getting pretty close to that, this being about what we're after. Just got the lemon left. I don't want to overdo my working of the lemon because it's a bit more delicate but we'll work at as much as we can. Starting with this shadow, can add a little bit more complexity too. Go for a little bit more warmth in the light reflected up from the table, because the table's quite brown, so it means any colours kind of coming in from that side should feel moderately warm, relatively speaking. Colour helps it out a bit. One thing we need to look for is a little sort of dark green tip to the lemon, where the stem's coming out of. It does kind of finish off that section of the lemon slightly, because it felt a little bit unusual that was just kind of sitting there unfinished. Yeah, that helps a bit. And I can add a little bit of a stem again that sticks out, similar to the top of the plum. So we can just heighten this little stem a tiny bit. That's gone maybe a little bit too low chroma, so we can add a touch of colour, attempt to add a touch of colour to it. So that pretty much does it for about the level of detail that we're after. Just going to simplify that back edge a bit, because it seemed a little bit overcomplicated really for what was going on. So you can do things like that. You can change what's actually happening to a certain extent, if it makes the painting feel more effective. Obviously you can always take that kind of artistic license with anything you're doing, which is one of the pleasures of painting. But yeah, it's pretty good, this one. Possibly somewhat tempted just to smudge out that one highlight in the plum. And possibly also this highlight in the lemon. And just reinforce those lights a little bit. So you just go back to completely pure white. Let's see if we can just use that highlight effectively. And yeah, probably leave it at that point, I think. Just pop the camera off its tripod and we can have a slightly closer look at the painting. Try to get to refocus, there we go. So yeah, you get a general idea for how it ended up looking. Can try to zoom in a bit, there we go. Let's have a look at it in detail. You can see it's not super detailed, but we have roughly got the colours we're after. And it's a really interesting exercise. So it's an exercise in colour matching and sort of working quickly, working with paint, with a subject that isn't going to be super complex if you make it fairly simple, just use one piece of fruit or two pieces of fruit. But you can get a lot out of it in terms of your development, and you can get nice little paintings. You could do a series of these, you could try to do one of these a day because they literally are just sort of one-day paintings. But yeah, that's pretty much it. As with the last two, I'll post up a document with some tips about this stage, things to look for, things that can help improve the painting with relative ease, that sort of thing. Yeah, so you can look for that document on the Art Coursework blog, or you can follow the link through to the OCAD course. You can sign up to the course and get tutorial from myself and other tutors, which can be really good if you're working alongside us. But yeah, I hope that's interesting, and I will see you guys soon.